The mother of my husband's father said, "You are ugly and stupid, still a burden with that belly," and my husband stayed silent because it was his mom. All right, here's what happened. It was 3 in the morning in Montana, and I was halfway through my second week of community service at this tiny wildlife rehabilitation center just outside of Kalispell. Not that kind of community service, nothing criminal. I'd signed up after a bad breakup and a kind of quarter-life crisis that pushed me out of Seattle and into the middle of nowhere with a need to feel useful. That's where I met Thomas. I'd seen him once or twice before during shift changes. He had this worn-out camo hoodie and always looked like he knew exactly what he was doing, which was intimidating, considering I still needed to check the binder every time I tried to prepare a formula bottle for the Fox kits. The night we actually talked was cold, even for October, and I remember my hands were shaking so bad trying to unscrew the cap from the feeding bottle that one of the cubs nipped at me out of frustration. Thomas was already in the enclosure, crouched down, his voice low and kind of rough from sleep. I watched him reach into one of the kennels where a tiny fox kit was fussing and restless, probably hungry or scared or both. And then, out of nowhere, he started singing to it. Not in a joking way or to get a laugh, but in this soft, almost lullaby-like tune that I didn't recognize at all. He caught me staring, and I immediately felt like a creep, but he didn't seem to mind. "It's an old farm song," he said, gently stroking the fox's ears. "My grandma used to sing it to the chickens. Swore it kept the eggs from cracking too early." And just like that, this guy who looked like he'd just walked out of a survivalist blog started humming to a fox kit like he was rocking a baby to sleep. We ended up finishing the rest of the feedings in a quiet kind of rhythm. Me handing off bottles, him managing the ones too fidgety for me to handle. It was all very routine, and yet somehow not. At the end of our shift, around 4:30 a.m., we went into the tiny volunteer kitchen for some stale gas station donuts someone had left and 2 cups of truly terrible coffee. The kind that tastes like burnt hopes and despair. That's when we started actually talking. He told me he grew up on a small dairy farm in Wyoming, that he'd been doing seasonal work at rehab centers like this one for a couple years since leaving his job in the city. Something about needing air again. I told him about Seattle, my ex, how I'd once tried to keep a cactus alive and still managed to kill it. I don't know why I told him that part, but he laughed, and it wasn't a forced laugh. It was the kind that makes you feel like you just passed a test you didn't know you were taking. By the time the sun was starting to peek up over the pine line, we were still sitting there, empty coffee cups between us, feet propped up on milk crates, talking about everything and nothing. Before he left, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a pen that didn't work. I handed him one from the counter, and he scribbled his number onto the inside flap of a takeout menu that had been stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a squirrel. "Just in case you want to hear the rest of the song," he said. And then he left, quietly, like someone who didn't need to make an exit to feel like he'd been there. That's how it started. Among foxes and bad coffee, and a lullaby from a Wyoming grandmother I'd never met. For a long time, things between Thomas and me were solid. We had our routine, shared an apartment in Bozeman with creaky floors, and this annoying leak under the bathroom sink that we just learned to live with. We traveled when we could, nothing extravagant, just road trips out to the coast or into Glacier when the weather was decent. We had our shows, too. Always watching reruns of Parks and Rec when we didn't feel like talking, which was rare, honestly. He was calm in the way that made me feel like I could let go a little, like I didn't have to constantly manage every second of my life. But his mom, Marion, was another story. From the start, she made it crystal clear that she didn't like me. I didn't even need to do anything wrong. It was the way I said salmon. Apparently, I put too much emphasis on the L. Or the way I curled my hair, which she said looked too artificial, even though I literally just scrunched it with some mousse and called it a day. I remember one time she watched me load the dishwasher and then, in front of everyone at Sunday dinner, reloaded the entire thing silently. Not a word to me, just this loud passive-aggressive sigh like I'd personally offended the spirit of clean dishes everywhere. I tried, though. I really did. I brought flowers when we visited. I helped clean up after meals. I listened to her long, winding stories about her days as a high school English teacher, even though they always ended with her saying how kids these days had no discipline. But every little thing I did seemed to go through some internal filter she had that always found the worst in me. I remember one Christmas, I knit her this scarf. Nothing crazy, just something I worked on during lunch breaks, and she looked at it like I'd handed her a dead bird. Said, "Oh, you made this? How? Thoughtful," and then never wore it once. Thomas, to his credit, didn't ignore it, but he didn't really stand up to it either. He'd say things like, "She's just old-fashioned," or "She doesn't mean anything by it. Ratch, she just worries." Which only made it worse, honestly, because when someone undermines you, and the person who's supposed to have your back brushes it off like you're just too sensitive, it starts to wear on you. Like maybe you were overreacting. Like maybe you do talk weird, or do the dishes wrong, or wear the wrong clothes, or speak too loudly at dinner. We kept living our life. We had a rhythm that worked, and I loved him, even with the cracks that started to show. But every visit to Marion's house felt like walking into a trap. She'd make these comments, so subtle they could almost pass as jokes, and Thomas would just smile like she was being quirky. That color really washes you out, Rachel. You sure talk a lot for someone who used to be so quiet. I guess we're doing Christmas your way this year. Always with that little smile that didn't reach her eyes. It got to the point where I started making excuses to skip the family gatherings. I'd fake being sick or having deadlines for work that didn't really exist. And even when I wasn't around, she'd still find ways to remind me that I wasn't one of them. Once, she sent Thomas home with a casserole in one of her old glass dishes and a note taped to the top that said, "This is how real lasagna is made." I hadn't even made lasagna in months, but I knew exactly what it was about. Every time I brought it up, he'd say something like, "It's just how she is, babe." Like that was supposed to explain it. Like years of digs and backhanded comments, and that constant, subtle hostility were supposed to be okay, just because that's how she is. I wanted to scream sometimes, but instead I just bottled it. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who made him choose between his mom and me. But I started to notice things in myself that scared me. I'd get tense when he mentioned going home. I'd replay every interaction with her in my head at night, dissecting them, wondering what I could have done differently. I started doubting myself, wondering if maybe I really wasn't good enough, like she seemed so determined to make me feel. And Thomas, he kept walking that line between us, always trying to keep the peace, always pretending things weren't as bad as they were. But they were. And pretending otherwise just made the cracks in our relationship spread wider. I could feel it. We were still us, still curled up on the couch watching our favorite shows, still holding hands during road trips, and taking turns making pancakes on Sundays. But there was something underneath it all now, this quiet, pulsing thing I couldn't name yet. But I knew it started with Marion. And the way Thomas always chose not to see it. There were a lot of things about Thomas that frustrated me, especially when it came to how he handled his mother, but there were other sides of him that made it almost impossible to stay angry for long. One of those was breakfast. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, no matter how late we'd stayed up or how rough the week had been, we had this ritual. It wasn't fancy or complicated, but it was ours. On Saturdays, Thomas would make banana pancakes from scratch, mashing the bananas with a fork while humming some ridiculous tune, usually that same lullaby he'd once sung to a fox cub the night we met. He had this methodical way of doing it too. He always used 2 bananas, never more, and refused to flip them until the bubbles on top had fully popped. I teased him for treating it like a science experiment, but honestly, they came out perfect every single time. I'd sit at the counter with my chin resting in my palm, watching him move around the kitchen like he was in his own little world, flour dusting the front of his shirt, his hair always a little messy from sleep. On Sundays, it was my turn. I made eggs with smashed avocado and chili sauce. Always the same chili sauce, the one I had to order online because nowhere local carried it. I'd toast thick slices of sourdough, scoop the avocado with a little lime and salt, and pile everything up while Thomas hovered like a kid waiting for dessert. It wasn't about the food, not really. It was about the ritual, the quiet way we carved out space for each other, even when life felt like it was pulling us in 100 directions. There was something grounding in those mornings. No phones, no noise, just us in the kitchen with the smell of coffee and eggs and burnt syrup sticking to the air. Sometimes we'd eat in silence. Sometimes we'd talk about the week ahead or laugh about something dumb we'd seen online. And every time, without fail, he'd say, "You should open a brunch place. I'd be your first customer." I'd roll my eyes and say, "You just sit at the counter and critique my avocado placement." He'd grin and say, "Exactly." When my cat, Marlo, passed away, that ritual became more than just a tradition. It became a lifeline. I'd had Marlo since college, since long before Thomas, and losing him felt like having the floor drop out from under me. I didn't eat much that week, barely spoke unless I had to, and cried more than I wanted to admit. I curled up in bed and stayed there longer than I should have, unable to imagine starting my day without hearing his soft paws pacing around the apartment. Thomas didn't try to fix it. He didn't say things like he was just a cat, or you'll get another one, which I knew Marion would have if she dared to call that week. Instead, he made coffee every morning and brought it to me in bed without saying a word. He didn't force me to talk or get up. He just set the mug on my nightstand, kissed my forehead, and let me grieve in peace. Sometimes he'd sit next to me and read silently, his hand resting on my ankle under the blanket. Other times he'd leave the door cracked just a little, so I could hear him in the kitchen, moving through the routine we'd built together. He even tried to make my eggs and avocado one morning, which ended in a burned slice of toast and half a bottle of chili sauce dumped directly onto the eggs. I ate every bite anyway. It tasted like effort, like love, like someone showing up for you in the smallest, quietest ways when everything feels broken. That was the thing with Thomas. He didn't always say the right thing, especially when it came to his mother or other people's opinions. But he showed up, with banana pancakes and black coffee and a burnt piece of toast, with warmth in the quiet moments and comfort when I didn't know how to ask for it. For a while, that was enough. Or at least, I wanted it to be. I didn't think much of it at first. A couple of days late, maybe 5 or 6. Honestly, I'd been so swamped with work that the entire week had blurred into a mess of missed emails, long meetings, and quick dinners eaten half cold at my desk. The nausea started midweek, mild at first, like I'd skipped a meal or had too much coffee too early. I blamed it on stress, or maybe something off with the yogurt I grabbed from the office fridge. It just didn't seem like something to worry about. Not seriously. But then another day passed, and then another, and I started feeling this quiet hum of dread in my chest. I didn't say anything to Thomas at first. I didn't even want to say it out loud to myself. It felt like if I spoke it, it would become real, and I wasn't ready for real. Not with Marion still acting like I was some stray dog her son brought home. Not with all the cracks forming beneath our seemingly perfect surface. It was Cindy who finally said what I wouldn't. We were getting lunch on Saturday. Well, I picked at a salad and tried not to gag at the smell of her grilled chicken wrap, and she just stared at me across the table with this look that only someone who knows you too well can give. You're pale, you're jumpy, and you haven't touched your Diet Coke. That's not stress, Rachel, she said. Take the test. I told her she was being dramatic. She didn't even blink. Do it tonight, she said, sliding a CVS receipt out of her purse and scribbling the name of a digital brand she swore by. No blue lines. No maybes. Just a word. I stopped at the store on the way home. It felt like a covert mission. I grabbed a bag of popcorn, some shampoo I didn't need, and tucked the test somewhere in the middle like I was trying to sneak it past someone. The cashier didn't even look up, just scanned everything while chewing her gum and asked if I wanted a bag. Back at the apartment, Thomas was out walking to the corner store for beer. I stood in the bathroom, my hands shaking as I opened the box. The test felt heavier than it should have. I followed the instructions like they were a sacred ritual, placed it on the edge of the sink, and didn't look at it right away. Instead, I stared at the grout between the tiles, counted the chips in the enamel on the edge of the tub. My stomach turned, and I couldn't tell if it was from nerves or something deeper. I picked it up after exactly 3 minutes. No plus sign. No faint line to squint at under the light. Just one word staring back at me, clear and absolute. Pregnant. I sat down on the cold tile floor, still holding the test like it might change if I stared hard enough. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside and the muffled sound of our neighbor's TV through the wall. Everything felt suspended in that moment, like time had paused and was waiting to see what I would do next. But I didn't do anything. I just sat there, the words still glowing in my hand, trying to understand what this meant. Not in theory, not someday, but now. Now, with Thomas. Now, in this apartment with the leaky bathroom sink and Marion waiting in the wings with her judgment and her casserole notes. Now, when I wasn't even sure if I was part of this family or just a placeholder in Thomas's life. I don't know how long I stayed there, but by the time I heard the front door open and his footsteps in the hallway, the word on the test was still there. Still clear. Still changing everything. I decided on Saturday. It felt like the right time. We'd always said our little breakfasts were sacred, and even through everything, the stress, the distance I didn't want to admit had started creeping in, the quiet resentment that built every time Thomas brushed off another one of Marion's comments. We still had our weekends. I wanted to tell him in a moment that belonged to us. Not with panic. Not with fear. Just something simple and good in ours. So I got up early. I wanted everything to be perfect. I made the eggs just the way he liked them, soft but not runny, sprinkled with sea salt and red pepper flakes. I mashed the avocado with lime, a pinch of garlic powder, and that chili sauce he always said was dangerously good. I even toasted the sourdough on the pan instead of the toaster because he once said it tasted better that way. Crispy, but not dry. I brewed his favorite coffee from the bag we only bought when we felt like treating ourselves, and I frothed the milk by hand. The way he always teased me was unnecessary, but secretly loved. I plated everything, wiped down the counter, and lit one of the good candles from the drawer. The test was hidden in my coat pocket, not because I planned to show it to him, but because I needed something tangible, something to remind myself this was real. I wasn't dreaming or imagining it. I was pregnant, and I was about to tell him, and the world was going to shift the second I did. He came out of the bedroom in pajama pants and a t-shirt, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair sticking up in 5 directions. He smiled when he saw the table. Wow, what's the occasion? I shrugged, trying to act casual, but my heart was racing. Just felt like doing something nice. He walked over and kissed my cheek. You're amazing, you know that? And I almost said it right then. I could feel the words rising in my throat, my mouth already forming the beginning of the sentence. But before I could open my mouth, I heard the sound that still makes my stomach drop just thinking about it. A key in the lock. The door swung open like it belonged to her, because in her mind, it did. And there she was. Marion. She didn't even knock. She walked in carrying a small bag of groceries like this was her house, not ours, and set them on the counter without so much as a hello. I brought those muffins Thomas likes, she said, brushing her hands on her coat like she'd just done something generous instead of barging in on a moment that wasn't hers. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The breath had caught in my chest, the fork halfway to my plate, my body frozen in that terrible middle space between fury and disbelief. Thomas blinked. Mom, what are you doing here? She looked at him like he was the one being ridiculous. I thought I'd stop by. I had extra bananas, and your freezer's always empty. You never keep fruit in this place. She glanced at the table, her eyes scanning the plates like she was doing an inspection. Oh, you made breakfast. Then she looked at me. How nice. The pause before that last part hung in the air like smoke. How nice. Not it looks delicious or what a sweet gesture, just a polite dismissal wrapped in condescension. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling. You can't just come in here, Marion. This isn't your house. She raised her eyebrows like she was offended at the suggestion. I have a key, and that gives you the right to let yourself in whenever you feel like it. Thomas stood between us now, looking more confused than anything. Mom, you should have called. I'm your mother. Do I really need an appointment to visit my own son? She said, smiling tightly, like she was daring me to argue. The moment was gone. Whatever I was about to say, whatever tiny spark of hope I had that this morning would be ours, had vanished under the weight of her presence. The warmth of the breakfast, the comfort of the ritual, the steady certainty I'd felt when I cracked the eggs, all of it turned cold in an instant. I sat down without saying anything else. I picked at my food while she unpacked her grocery bag and started lecturing Thomas about how she saw on the news that frozen produce might contain pesticides. I saw him glance at me, just once, a flicker of something like apology in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. He didn't ask her to leave. He didn't hand back the key. He just sat down and poured himself coffee like this was all normal. And I sat there too, 1,000 words stuck in my throat, with the most life-altering news I'd ever had folded into the pocket of my coat like it didn't matter anymore. We were both sitting there, not saying much, just scrolling through our phones like nothing had happened. The breakfast sat cold between us, untouched. Marion had settled onto the couch with one of those smug little smiles she wore like a badge. The silence in the apartment wasn't quiet. It was thick, heavy, like it had weight, like it knew something none of us wanted to say out loud. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, too fast, too loud. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't hold it in. So I stood up. My knees were trembling, and I didn't even try to hide it. I reached into the pocket of my coat, the one hanging over the back of the kitchen chair, and pulled out the test. It was still in its plastic sleeve, the word faded just slightly from time, but still clear. Still loud. Still true. I walked over and held it out to Thomas. He didn't even look up. He didn't even lift his eyes off the screen of his phone. Just kept scrolling, his thumb moving in that lazy, careless way like we were sitting in a waiting room instead of in the middle of something that was about to change everything. Then he said it. Abortion is fast. Bad timing. Those were his exact words. Flat. Like reading off a menu. Like this was a minor inconvenience. Like I was a mistake he could undo if he just moved fast enough. I froze. My hand still stretched out, holding the test like it meant something. Like he would take it from me, and everything would slow down and make sense again. But he didn't even glance at it. He just said those 5 words and kept looking at whatever was on his phone, like this moment wasn't anything. Then Marion laughed. Actually laughed. She stood up slowly, walked toward me, and looked me over like she was inspecting a used coat in a thrift store. Then she leaned in, her voice sharp and quiet and calculated. He finally realized that you are neither beautiful nor smart, she said. Just a burden with a belly. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat closed up so tight I thought I might choke. There were so many things I wanted to scream. So many ways I wanted to tear her down with every ounce of fury inside me. But my body wouldn't move. My mouth wouldn't work. I just stood there, holding that little plastic test like it was proof I existed. Like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. And they both just sat there like nothing had changed. Like I was already gone. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. Even though something inside me already felt shattered beyond repair. I just walked into the bathroom, shut the door behind me, and washed my hands in silence. The sound of the water was the only thing anchoring me to the moment, the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the soap twice, but I kept going, rubbing my palms together like I could scrub the words off my skin. When I stepped out, neither of them looked at me. Thomas was still on the couch, scrolling, like I'd disappeared. Marion was sipping the coffee I had made. Mine. The one I poured with shaking hands an hour earlier, back when I thought this morning was going to be something good. I walked past both of them without a word. I sat down on the edge of the bed, pulled on my sneakers, and tied them slowly. I didn't pack anything. No suitcase, no bag. I left behind the scarf I always wore, the jacket I'd had since college, even the notebook where I'd written down baby names once, just in case. I didn't take a single thing from that apartment except my phone and my wallet. When I closed the door behind me, it made a soft clicking sound. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. I didn't have a plan. I just started walking. The air outside felt too sharp, like it was scraping the inside of my chest, but I kept going. I wandered aimlessly, turning corners without thinking, crossing streets without looking at the lights. My fingers gripped my phone too tightly, but I didn't call anyone. I didn't know what I would even say if I did. It wasn't until my legs started to ache that I realized I'd been walking for nearly an hour. My breath was visible in the air, and my cheeks were numb. I found a coffee shop tucked between a laundromat and a secondhand bookstore and stepped inside like I was hiding from a storm. The bell above the door jingled, and the warmth hit me all at once, smelling like roasted beans and something sweet I couldn't quite place. I ordered a latte. I didn't even hear what kind. I just pointed at the first thing on the board and handed over my card with hands that still wouldn't stop trembling. The place was half empty. I found a seat near the back, next to a window with fogged glass, and curled into the corner like I wanted to disappear. The latte was too hot at first, and then it wasn't. I sipped it slowly, so slowly, like stretching out time could somehow delay the reality that waited outside. I stayed there for 3 hours. 3 hours of replaying that morning in my head. Of hearing Thomas's voice over and over, cold and thoughtless. Abortion is fast. Bad timing. Of seeing Marion's face twist into that hateful smile, her words cutting deeper than I'd expected them to. Just a burden with a belly. No one bothered me. The barista glanced at me a few times, but didn't say anything. I think she knew. Not the details, maybe, but something. I must have looked like someone holding on by a thread. I didn't cry. Not in that coffee shop. Not while the latte cooled to room temperature, and my phone buzzed once with a notification I didn't bother checking. I just sat there, staring into the bottom of the cup, reminding myself that I had left. That I still had that. I had nothing else. Not my clothes, not my home, not the man I thought would be there when it mattered, but I had my dignity. I had the strength to walk out. And for now, that was enough. Cindy didn't ask any questions when I showed up at her door. She just opened it, looked at me for a second like she was trying to figure out whether to hug me or let me fall apart, then stepped aside and said, "You can take the floor. Couch is a mess." That was it. No big speech, no pity, just a place to be. Her apartment was small, even smaller than I remembered, and it smelled like a mix of cat food, cigarettes, and something vaguely floral that might have come from a plug-in air freshener buried somewhere under a pile of laundry. Her cat, Tater Tot, hissed at me once and then promptly ignored my existence, choosing instead to nap on a warm spot by the radiator like nothing in the world could ever matter again. I didn't have anything. No clothes, no toothbrush, no charger. Just my phone, which was hanging on at 9%, and my wallet with a debit card that barely worked. Cindy dug out an old blanket from the back of her closet and cleared a corner of the living room floor for me. I curled up there like a guest in my own life, too tired to cry and too numb to sleep. The next morning, Cindy handed me a plastic bag with 2 t-shirts she'd picked up at a secondhand store on her way home from work. They were faded and smelled like the bin they came from, but they were clean. She smiled like it wasn't a big deal, like we weren't standing in the kitchen with peeling linoleum and a broken drawer that wouldn't close all the way. "I'll do your laundry in the sink," she said, already filling it with water. "Don't worry. It's not the first time." We fell into a rhythm, if you could even call it that. I stayed quiet most of the time. She smoked on the fire escape and let me be. Sometimes we watched terrible late-night TV while sitting on the floor, eating cereal straight from the box. Other times we said nothing at all, which somehow felt better than pretending to be okay. On the 5th day, Cindy came home with grease on her jeans and a weird glow in her face. "I got something," she said, dropping her keys on the counter. "It's not glamorous, but it's something." She'd landed a dishwashing job at this tiny corner cafe near the train station. Said the owner, a woman named Vicky with bleach blonde hair and arms covered in faded tattoos, looked her up and down and just said, "Be here at 5 a.m. No paperwork. No fake smiles. Just a job." That night, we sat on the floor again, both of us cross-legged with our backs against the wall, sharing a sleeve of saltines and a can of Diet Coke. The city outside kept doing what it always did: sirens, honking, someone yelling across the street like their life depended on it. But inside that cramped apartment that smelled like too many lives had passed through it, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Safe. Not exactly, but maybe a little less invisible. It started getting harder around the end of that first week. The nausea hit me in waves, sometimes first thing in the morning, sometimes right in the middle of walking down the street or standing in line at the corner store. The kind that makes your mouth water and your chest tighten, like your body's trying to turn itself inside out. My lower back started aching too, this constant dull pressure that wouldn't go away no matter how I sat or stretched or tried to ignore it. The mood swings crept in quietly at first. Little things that normally wouldn't bother me suddenly left me gutted or furious or both. One minute I'd be laughing at something Cindy said, and the next I'd be crying over a dropped spoon or a bad commercial. I could feel everything raw, like my skin was on backward and every emotion was too close to the surface. Then Thomas started calling. At first, I let it ring. Then came the texts, one after another, short and weirdly polite at first, like he didn't know what tone to take. Please call me. We need to talk. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. When I didn't answer, he started messaging from his work number. I knew it was him because he signed his name at the end like a damn business email. This is Thomas. I just want to talk. Please. One night, I finally listened to a voicemail. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to hear his voice to remind myself it was real, that he'd actually said what he said, that it wasn't just a nightmare looping in my head. He sounded tired. His voice cracked once, and he paused like he was waiting for me to interrupt, even though it was a recording. He said he regretted how things happened, that he was sorry for how it came across, that maybe we could start over. Start over. That was the moment something snapped. I don't even remember getting up. I just remember the phone leaving my hand, flying across the room and hitting the wall next to the microwave. It didn't shatter dramatically, just split down the side with a pathetic crack and dropped to the floor. The sound of it echoed, sharp and final. Vicky was drying her hands with a stained towel, standing near the sink with a cigarette behind her ear. She didn't flinch, didn't turn her head. My heart is breaking, she said, her voice flat. But I have dishes to wash. And then she went back to scrubbing a stack of plates like nothing had happened. I sat down on the kitchen floor and stared at the broken phone, the tiny cracks like veins across the screen, and felt this hollow emptiness in my chest that even the anger couldn't touch. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go back in time and unknow him. But mostly, I just wanted to stop feeling like the only one who still carried it all. Cindy said it without any build-up, without trying to cushion it, and maybe that was the best way she could have done it. We were sitting on opposite sides of the apartment, both of us eating instant noodles from plastic bowls, when she looked over at me and said, "I'm not throwing you out, but this can't go on forever." She didn't say it to be cruel. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the deeper kind that builds up from being around someone who's constantly sinking and pulling you down with them, even if they don't mean to. I didn't argue. I just nodded and kept eating, though I couldn't taste a single bite. That night, after she went to bed, I sat on the bathroom floor with the light off and my back against the door. I knew she was right. I was grateful, so grateful it hurt, but I couldn't stay curled up on her floor forever. I needed something else, somewhere to breathe. I called a shelter for pregnant women the next morning. The woman on the line had a soft voice and asked me a lot of questions that made me feel like I was filling out some kind of invisible report on my own failure. She told me there was a room, but I'd have to wait 3 days. I thanked her quietly and hung up, already trying to figure out how to make those 3 days stretch without breaking. Vicky found out about it later that afternoon. I don't even know how. It was like she had a sixth sense for when things were shifting. After our shift ended, she tossed me a granola bar, sat on the edge of the prep table, and said, "So what's the plan, kid?" I told her everything. That I'd found a place. That I just had to hold on a few more days. That I was out of ideas. She didn't react much. Just lit a cigarette near the back door, exhaled slowly, and said, "We're going to get you signed up for Medicaid. You got ID." I nodded. She pointed to her office. "Sit. Cindy's bringing her laptop. We're getting this done tonight." So we did. The three of us sat there, me, Cindy, and Vicky, crowded around a wobbly table with chipped laminate, clicking through forms and digging through my wallet for whatever scraps of documentation I had left. We signed me up for Medicaid first, then SNAP, then WIC. Cindy filled in the parts one didn't understand, and Vicky read everything out loud, even the fine print. I didn't say much. My head hurt and my back ached and the nausea was creeping in again, but I sat there with them anyway, because I didn't know how else to say thank you. By the end of it, My name was on 3 lists that might keep me fed and covered for a little while longer. No one cheered. There was no celebration. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I wasn't going to drown. Not yet. Not if I could make it through 3 more days. The shelter wasn't what I'd pictured, though I'm not even sure what I expected at that point. It was a converted community center on the edge of town, with low ceilings, cheap linoleum floors, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everything feel colder than it already was. My room was just a bed behind a thin partition, one of 20 in a wide open space that never really got quiet, even at night. People coughed, cried, snored, whispered into their phones. The showers were shared and never had hot water for long. You had to sign up in 15-minute blocks and clean up after yourself like your life depended on it, because in some ways, it did. There were rules. Curfew at 9. No guests. No food outside the dining area. No yelling. No fighting. No exceptions. At first, the restrictions made me feel like I was in some kind of halfway purgatory, but after a few days, the structure was comforting in a strange way. There was a list on the wall of chores and responsibilities. You knew what to expect, and that alone felt like a luxury I hadn't had in weeks. It was at the shelter, of all places, where I had my first ultrasound. A volunteer from a local clinic came by in a van that had been turned into a mobile medical unit. She took me in without much ceremony and handed me a gown that felt thin and cold against my skin. I lay down on the narrow exam table, the paper crinkling beneath me, and stared at the ceiling while she squeezed cold gel onto my stomach. Then I heard it. A heartbeat. Fast, steady, real. She turned the screen toward me, and I saw the shape. Small, curled up, and barely more than a bean. But it was there. 10 weeks, she said. Everything looked fine. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, staring at the blurry image like it belonged to someone else, like I was watching a movie about another person's life. But inside, something shifted. Not joy, not peace, not even hope exactly, but something like recognition. This was mine. Whatever else had been taken, this wasn't. I kept working at the cafe, clinging to that job like it was the last thread holding me to the rest of the world. Vicky didn't ask for updates. She just handed me my schedule every week and made sure I had breaks when I needed them, even if I said I was fine. A week after moving into the shelter, I picked up a second job. Warehouse work at a discount retail store. Early shift, for in the morning, unpacking boxes and stocking shelves before customers came in. It paid just over minimum wage and left my back screaming by noon, but I took it without hesitation. I needed the money. I needed something to do besides lie awake behind a partition listening to strangers argue about who left hair in the sink. Every morning, I walked in through the loading dock in the dark, my hands buried in the sleeves of my too-thin jacket, counting the hours in my head like stepping stones across a river I wasn't sure I could cross. But I kept walking. I kept showing up. The warehouse, the cafe, the shelter, over and over, until the repetition became a rhythm, a kind of fragile, flickering stability. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, something was enough. He showed up at the cafe on a Tuesday. I had just finished refilling the napkin holders and was reaching for the broom when I looked up and saw him standing near the door, that same worn jacket, hands stuffed in the pockets like he was nervous. Thomas. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping, like something had been slowly gnawing at him for weeks. Maybe it had, but I didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I just stood there for a second, the handle of the broom in my grip, and then turned away like he was a customer I didn't recognize. Before he could say anything, Vicky appeared behind him like she'd been waiting for this moment since the day she saw me smash my phone against the wall. She didn't even ask what was going on. She didn't need to. She just stepped in front of him and said, quietly but with steel in her voice, "She's working. You're leaving." He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to plead. I'll never know because she didn't give him the chance. She took a step forward, her hand on the door, and he walked out. Slow, reluctant, but he went. I watched from behind the counter as he paused on the sidewalk for a moment, like he was waiting for me to come after him. I didn't. After that, he didn't try again, and I finally let myself move forward without the weight of waiting for his next move. I started planning. Really planning. I found a notebook in the shelter's donation bin and filled it with lists: crib, clothes, bottles, baby wipes, things I didn't understand yet, but knew I'd need. I added another page for forms, Medicaid renewal, WIC updates, child health insurance applications. I talked to women in the shelter who had done it before, borrowed their wisdom like it was gold. I walked to every thrift store within bus distance, priced out used bassinets and onesies, started asking about donation centers. I tracked everything, every penny earned from the cafe and the warehouse, every free sample from the clinic, every pamphlet about newborn care I could get my hands on. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't neat. But it was mine. My effort. My plan. Then one afternoon, weeks after the cafe incident, I got the call. I was taking my break behind the kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee out of a paper cup, when the woman from the Crisis Housing Fund told me there was an opening. A real apartment. Not a bed behind a curtain. A studio, small, nothing fancy, but it had a locking door and a kitchen, and I wouldn't have to count ceiling tiles while strangers whispered around me at night. I thanked her 3 times before I could even ask where it was. The first time I walked into that place, I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I just stood there in the middle of the room, staring at the chipped cabinets and the scratched linoleum floor, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt since everything fell apart. It was quiet, and it was mine. I set my bag down in the corner, sat cross-legged on the floor, and leaned back against the wall with my hands on my belly. I didn't know what came next. I didn't have a full plan for tomorrow, let alone the rest of the year. But for the first time in months, I wasn't surviving on someone else's kindness. I had made it here. I had something that belonged to me. And that was a win. A small, cracked, beautiful victory. My first. It happened just before the cafe opened, when the morning rush hadn't yet rolled in, and the smell of fresh muffins still hung in the air. I was wiping down the counter when I felt something shift, not pain exactly, at least not at first, but a sudden release, a quiet and terrifying pop. I looked down and realized what it meant before I even had to say it out loud. Vicky was already moving. She didn't panic, didn't raise her voice. She grabbed her phone and called Lydia, one of the older women from the shelter who had helped more of us through labor than most nurses probably had. She's at 39 weeks, Vicky said, pressing the phone between her shoulder and cheek as she calmly helped me to sit. It's happening now. By the time the ambulance came, I was breathing hard, gripping the side of a dining chair, while someone mopped the floor where my water had broken. I don't remember much of the ride to the hospital, just flashes, Lydia's hand in mine, Vicky's voice reminding me to breathe, the cold air against my face as we moved between doors and fluorescent lights. Ella was born at 6:17 in the morning. She weighed 6 pounds, 3 ounces. Her cry was soft at first, like she was still deciding whether she liked the world she'd been pushed into. I remember the nurse saying, "She's here." And then I saw her, red-faced and squinting, and nothing else mattered. Not the pain, not the exhaustion, not the way everything in my life had unraveled to get to this point. I held her against my chest and felt her tiny breaths like butterfly wings against my skin. Her fingers curled instinctively. Her mouth made a soft clicking sound as she searched for something familiar. I whispered her name, Ella, over and over like a prayer. She blinked once, her whole face still crumpled from birth, and then she smiled. Not a reflex, not a trick of the muscles. Just a flicker of something that felt like forgiveness. Thomas asked to see her. He called the hospital, then texted me through a new number I didn't recognize. He said he just wanted to hold her once, just to say hello. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sent him a photo of Ella wrapped in the hospital blanket, her face turned slightly to the side, peaceful and unaware. That was all. I told him contact would only happen on my terms. There would be no unannounced visits. No keys. No more half-hearted regrets pretending to be apologies. He never argued. I think he finally understood. A month after Ella was born, I moved into a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't anything special, 2 bedrooms, old plumbing, chipped paint, but it had a fenced-in yard and a working heater. My parents had owned it for years, a leftover rental they hadn't gotten around to selling. They offered it to me at a reduced rate. No questions asked, no long conversations about the past. Just a key in my hand and a nod. I accepted. I kept working at the cafe. Vicky adjusted my schedule so I could take the early shift and be home in time to nap when Ella napped. The community stepped in ways I hadn't expected. People I barely knew donated diapers, a stroller, a car seat that had only been used once. A woman from a nearby church dropped off a basket of homemade meals, even though I hadn't asked for anything. I hung a photo of Ella above my bed, next to the window that let in the morning sun. Every day felt like starting from scratch, but not in the way that used to terrify me. There are hard nights. Nights where she won't sleep unless I hold her for hours, where I sit on the floor and cry silently into her blanket because the weight of everything catches up to me. But even then, I don't regret any of it. Not the struggle, not the silence, not the pain. Not even the mornings I wake up with the ache in my back and wonder how I'll keep doing this. Because I do. One day at a time. And each one is mine.